We made a point this morning, if you'll remember, about God's holiness and what we said holiness actually means. We made the point that holiness, in one way of looking at it, is to sum up the fact that God's different. He's incomparable. And what that means then about His people is that we also should be different. Not that we are incomparable, but we should be working toward the goal of there's a difference between us and the world around us. And one of the ways and one of the directions then we could take that goal and that aim that we have is to think about when we go to work on Monday morning tomorrow. When we go about our work throughout the week, how are we different? Do we work differently? Do we labor differently? Are we different employees? Are we different students because we are a child of God? That's what we want to focus on this evening, is thinking about having a godly work ethic. What we want to develop is the quality that from sun up till sundown, we do the work that we have to do in every capacity of our lives. We're not here talking so much even about the work we do here in the building, the work that we do as part of the Jones Road Church, or even the kinds of Bible studies or other work we might do in a direct spiritual kind of context. We're talking about what are you doing when you're sitting in front of your monitor or at your station or in front of the conveyor belt or in front of your patient, your student, or whoever you're seeing from day to day throughout the week. How we act there should also be a reflection of who we are and being transformed on the inside. And so we want to spend our lesson this evening on some practical aspects of how to be a good, godly worker and how to cultivate that godly work ethic. And I think this is something that's true and that anyone of any age can observe, and that we're living in a time in a society when we actually need lessons on how to work hard. Now, some of you younger ones may be thinking, oh, here he goes. The new generation's lazy. Kids get off my lawn. They don't make them like they used to. All right, so yes, it is the complaint of every generation that the one below them don't work as hard, they don't earn as much as maybe they have in previous times. We're not really coming at it from that perspective. Yes, we all need encouragement, some more than others, on working hard, on having that kind of work ethic. What I mean by our time and place and our history and society right now is true of all of us in this room right now and all listening. Because of all of our modern comforts and conveniences, these all are great and I appreciate them, I'm thankful for them, but they can lull us into a kind of attitude where all we want is comfort. We want to be comfortable. We feel like we must be amused and entertained and comfortable all the time. Well, the way the world works and the way that we can be most effective as God's children is to learn and understand that part of life, part of being a Christian, means I develop some calluses, if not physically, mentally. We have to develop a kind of attitude toward work, where work is something that we can honor God in. And so that's the perspective that we're bringing this lesson in. So what we want to do in thinking about a godly work ethic, there are a number of ways we could take this. We could look at the way that Joseph, whether in Potiphar's household or in prison or in the court of the Pharaoh, how he worked. That would be a good lesson. Or we could look at Ruth and how she worked with her mother-in-law Naomi and how she worked gleaning in the fields of Boaz. Or we could look at even the life of Christ and the way in which tirelessly he went about his work doing good and leading others into the kingdom. We can look at Paul laboring night and day. But what we want to do is, instead of looking maybe at these specific examples, we want to look at what the Scriptures have to say directly to us about the attitudes we should have in our work. So as you would imagine, we will be spending some time in the wisdom literature, in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. But certainly there will be some other scriptures that we'll look at. What we want to do is have just a couple of simple parts to our lesson this evening. We want to think first of all about the troubles of the lazy. And this hopefully will be a motivating part of the sermon, of the lesson, to where we can look deeply and challenge our own selves honestly and look at what the future is going to be like for us if we don't cultivate this godly work ethic. Then we want to look at some practical suggestions from scriptures on how we can have the kind of work ethic and approach to labor that would please and honor God, finally we end with the emphatic statement, a Christian simply is a hard worker. And so what it comes down to is this: if I am a Christian who loafs at work, who doesn't give an honest day's work for a day's pay, that is unbecoming and ill-fitting of a Christian. If I'm a younger Christian and I don't do my part with the chores around the house, with the expectations that my parents have, or at school, or if I've gotten to the age where I work a job along with classes, if I don't give 100% and I don't give my best, that's not becoming of me as a Christian. We want to learn that when it comes to work, when it comes to labor, if a task is to be done, whether it's great or small, whether I can see the consequences now or I don't see the consequences, how I do anything is how I do everything. We want to develop the patterns, the habits, and the attitude of anything that I do. In labor, in work, I give it my best. Every time I give 100%, not for selfish reasons, not to look good before others, but because God accepts nothing less from me, and He is pleased ultimately with nothing less. So that's the approach we want to take in our lesson this evening. So first, if we are going to be lazy, life is going to be tough. And the Proverbs bear this out, this divine wisdom. I just list the scriptures up here, and you can gather the applications, not only from my own thoughts, but maybe others occur to you. Jot those down as well. So let's first turn over to Proverbs chapter 24. We're looking here at if you're going to have the mindset of, I won't prioritize work, I'm not going to be concerned about being a hard worker, life will bring you some troubles. If you look in Proverbs chapter 24, we see in verses 30 through 34 something the wise man observes. Beginning in verse 30. I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. Now pause there in verse 30. If we are lazy, guess what? We develop a reputation for such. And when you're in the classroom, if you're on the ball field, if you're at work, there comes a point where everyone knows if you're lazy or if you're a hard worker. He knows where the field of the lazy man is. Am I going to be the lazy man or am I not? But it's not just the reputation that precedes the lazy man. You can look at his field and you can determine that. Look in verse 31. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So shall your poverty come like a prowler and your need like an armed man. You can imagine if you were to go by a field not knowing whose it was. All right, let's imagine we go and we don't know whose field this belongs to, and you see it's all overgrown. It hasn't been cultivated. It's not even intentionally being left fallow. It's obvious no one's doing anything with it. And the stone wall has been broken down. You might think, who came in and destroyed this poor person's field? All right, what marauding band or what kind of wild herd of animals came through and broke this up and just made it look such a wreck? Who broke in? Who did this? Who took from this man? His own laziness. What the wise man here tells us is that if I choose to be lazy and I neglect to have a good godly work ethic, my life will be in disarray. Life will not be pleasant or comfortable for me. If you go back and look over to chapter 13 as well, a similar point's being made here. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 4, the soul of a lazy man desires and has nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made rich. Look, everyone wants to be successful. Everyone wants to be able to hold down a job that can provide financial security and a sense of dignity to us. All right, we all want these things, and we might have personal goals. They might be health goals, they might be other kinds of academic or career goals or these other things. We might have goals for our home or for our yard and landscaping. We have all these goals, and we have all these visions of what they might be. But if we are lazy, we go through our lives just wanting and just wishing. But it is the job of the successful person, or that is of the hardworking person, to have that kind of success. If I am constantly having to only want, but I'm not getting, part of it comes down to work ethic. But there's another point that we need to make here about the troubles of the lazy person. Go over to chapter 15 and verse 19. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns, but the way of the upright is a highway. Think about this for a moment. If Mondays, or really every morning, is just, the traffic is just absolutely terrible, it's hectic, and it's always a rush getting into work and all of this other things, well, hold on. What if we rewind a little bit and, maybe did you get yourself ready the night before to do this or that? If we don't have the kind of work ethic, even in these small things, in our habits and our routines, are we going to constantly be met with trouble with these kinds of obstacles? But it's also true that laziness breeds more laziness. Go over to chapter 19 and verse 15. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. It's true physically, and it's true in our mental approach to work, and that is, the less I do, the less I want to do. The longer you sit on the couch, the harder it is to get up. The longer before you start the project that you know needs to be done, the harder it will be to do it. And so here, what the wise man is telling us then, if we let a kind of laziness, both physically and emotionally, come upon us, this will bring us into a further state of laziness. Go over to chapter 26 in verse 13. The lazy man says, "There's a lion in the road, a fierce lion is in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl, it wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly." Think about the kind of pictures of laziness here and the troubles that they face. As it says in verse 13, the lazy man makes excuses for why work can't be done or why he's not ready to do it. Well, there's a lion in the street, I'll be killed. Is that really probable? But he makes excuses. And laziness then doesn't even allow him to come out of bed. And verse 14, as a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. What's the picture there? You've turned over on one side and you're dreaming. The alarm goes off. I need to get up. I need to get to work. I need to go and do this or that. But you snooze, and just like a creaky door, you turn to the other side and you go back to sleep. The idea here is that laziness is bringing this man down in a spiral of laziness and a lack of efficiency. And so what we're saying here is the wise man is warning us about what laziness will do if we will give in to that. But there's another scripture I want to think about and another principle that we want to get from this. Go over to Haggai chapter 2. In Haggai chapter 2, the situation, that should be chapter 1. I need to get over my secretary about that. In Haggai chapter 1, here the prophet was spent to a generation of God's people that had returned to Jerusalem, and they were failing to rebuild the temple as God would wish for them. And so as they are there in Jerusalem, they've let the work on the temple go. They've let that lie fallow. They've let small obstacles get in their way. But it's not that they've been lazy per se. They've been building their own houses, and they've been building rich houses. And so in chapter 1 of Haggai in verse 4, the prophet says to the nation, "Is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, and this temple to lie in ruins?" And so what this tells me is that the problem that we often see today is not a new problem, and that is we can be as busy as could be, but that doesn't mean we're not lazy. Busyness is the new laziness. And what I mean by that is this. Even in a simple, mundane kind of illustration, if you've got a paper or a report that you've got to turn in the next day, like in school, or you've got some kind of project around the house that you've been meaning to get to, those dishes are there in the sink, and they're I can't really write until I get those dishes taken care of. So you do that. All right. Well, I might have some email I need to check before I get onto this, and so I'll take care of that. What we do is we busy ourselves with these small things, and what that does then is it allows us or gives us permission to neglect doing what we ought to be doing while we're busy and doing something else. Energy and activity is not productivity. And what it comes down to is the lesson not only of the Proverbs, what we see from Haggai, and that is especially with spiritual work that needs to be done. Spiritual projects we should undertake. Spiritual remodeling inside that we should do. But even in the other kinds of work that we do, it is not befitting of a child of God to just busy ourselves with these things and neglect to do what actually needs to be done. To neglect priorities and to focus on these small things is a form of laziness itself, because we're shirking doing what needs to be done. The scriptures throughout warn us of the troubles of the lazy. But what about practical advice that the scriptures give us in cultivating a godly work ethic? Well, one would be, if we'll turn to chapter 6 of Proverbs, we see a lesson from the animal kingdom on what having a good godly work ethic will look like. Look over to Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs 6 and verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which, having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. The ant. You ever just stopped and observed ants going about their work? Have you ever, when you're watching a line of ants, maybe convey crumbs or food to their colony, or maybe remove some kind of large insect or some kind of obstacle in the path? Have you ever watched those ants? Have you one time ever seen, like up on a mound or something like that, one ant with a little whip, whipping and barking orders to the line of ants? You never see that. You never see the sergeant ant or the one in charge telling the others what to do. They just do it. They know what they need to do. And so one beginning we can make in having a godly work ethic is, again, not only with spiritual needs that we have, whether in work with the church or specific study of God's Word or these things, even in all of our work, is to develop initiative and to be able to show that in our work. That's one of the things that will most distinguish us, is to have our heads and our eyes up looking for opportunities to do the best we can. But also, if you'll turn over to chapter 20 of Proverbs, one of the lessons we also have to learn in cultivating this is, first of all, to ourselves, then to others, is to stop the habit of making excuses. In chapter 20 and verse 4, the lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing. Even in this part of the world, does anyone want to go out in the winter, in the elements, and to go about the work of plowing? You've spent all year laboring. You have sown. You have cultivated. You have reaped. You've got the harvest. Can't you take some time off and enjoy it? It's cold outside. There are always excuses to be had. But excuses are generally our way of trying to persuade and convince ourselves to have a good conscience when we're not doing what it is our obligation or responsibility to do. The mature child of God moves beyond this. Go also to chapter 22 and verse 13. We already noted this scripture. The lazy man says, there's a lion outside, I shall be slain in the streets. Here, the excuse is that of a fear. And we often bring that excuse that limits us and that sometimes makes us bad workers. And that is, I may not succeed. I may not do well at that. I may fail at that. And thus, that we think gives us the reason and the permission not to give 100% effort. The scriptures teach us again, that's part of cultivating this work ethic. But it's not just about working hard. Go over to chapter 24 of Proverbs and verse 27. The scriptures teach us that even in the mundane things of life, the child of God brings the wisdom to his life that says, I not only work hard, I work smartly. In chapter 24 and verse 27, prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house. Now, on the one hand, we could say, with that bit of advice to an agricultural society, you could say, sure, that's great, good advice. Make sure we've got the field set and then build your house. Okay, well, that's what I do. Well, even above and beyond that, there's a principle that God is teaching us here. And that is, to all labor, to all work, whether it's the work of the moment or plotting out a life of work, there is an order to do things in. And there is an order to do things in that's wise and an order that's unwise. What you can imagine here in this verse is of the person who says, now, the labor of the fields and all of that, that can wait. I need somewhere to sleep. I need somewhere that's comfortable. And so I'll get that set. I'll build my house and I'll make it as nice as could be. And then after a couple of months have gone by, guess what? I've missed the planting season. Oh, I'll rush out and get them planted. I'll get that in. No, nature won't wait. You've lost the opportunity because you have failed to work smartly, wisely. You have missed out on important opportunities. And so what he says is, whatever you need to get done first, that needs to work and has time to work and that requires time, you can get that going, and then while the crops are being cultivated, while that's now in the ground, go about your other kind of work. One of the best things we can learn, both on the big scale and in the small scale, is that we can have the greatest productivity as God's children in any task if we'll understand that there's an order to doing things in. Just the simplest of examples, but these start to build up in our lives to make a difference, and they can remove anxiety. Let's say, for example, you've got a couple of household chores that you've got to get done before you can do other things that you need to do. Let's say, for example, I've got dishes to take care of and I've got clothes to wash. All right, so what's the order I do them in? All right, maybe I get something started that can be worked on while I do something else. Okay, that's a small, maybe kind of silly example, but what about other things? I want to someday have a career where I can provide for myself and maybe for a family someday. Now, let me think about training and work and interning and apprenticing or going to school. Can I get that long, tedious process and cycle started before I maybe worry about other things? So to the child of God, life itself is an opportunity to make the most out of what God is giving us, and part of that has to do with working hard and smartly. Go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 10. A similar point's being made here, but from a different perspective. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, let's notice verses 8 through 10. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull, and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. What the wise man here is telling us is that in every activity of life, no matter what you're doing, whether it's in this building or at work, at home, whatever the context is, anytime we try to do something or undertake a task, there are risks and there are dangers inherent in that task, in that work. But to the degree that we can have some foresight and anticipate what the obstacles will be, what the difficulties will be, and we will take measures to accommodate or to address those difficulties or to prepare ourselves adequately for the task, then that will go more smoothly, and that wisdom can bring success. Life is dangerous. There are risks. We fail from time to time. We don't always succeed. But the person who just has the mindset of every task, every job, I'm just going to go blindly and rush into it and just bear hug this thing, and that is not going to lead to a happy life for God's children. There comes a point where we can open up the box and try and build the thing and fix it before we look at the directions, or we can save ourselves a lot of time by just looking at the directions first and then proceeding that way. With life, that is true. With our walk as a child of God and our work ethic, this is true. What the Scriptures also teach us in cultivating a godly work ethic is that if we will simply give the effort, we will then find success. You reap what you sow. Look in chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes in verse 1. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. The wise man here is telling us, even if it might hurt, even if it might be getting out of your comfort zone, and this is true in personal evangelism, it's true in taking part in the worship assembly, it's true in maybe having relationships that are positive with others to help encourage them in the Lord. Whatever the case is, even though it's hard, get out there and do it. You never know if it will succeed or not. When he says, give a serving to 7, also to 8, he's saying, don't be stingy, don't hold back, give your best in every situation, and you will reap what you sow. In verse 3, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Again, it's a reminder that for all the tasks that we will do and undertake as God's children, there are circumstances and there are factors that we can't control. As it says here, if the clouds are full of rain, they'll empty themselves on the earth. If I go outside and I see the dark, heavy, low clouds, and they empty their rain, I can't shake my fist at the clouds and make it stop. It will do what it's going to do. If a tree falls, I can't just go running underneath it and say, no, stop. I'll hold it, I'll catch it, and make it fall somewhere else. No, where it falls is where it falls. There are so many factors and circumstances in our lives I have no control over. They are what they are. And if I just sit on my hands waiting in life for all the circumstances, all the scenarios to be just right, to be perfect, before I'll get out there and do what I need to do, I will always wait. And I won't get done what needs to be done in any capacity in my life. As he says in verse 4, the farmer who goes out with a bag of seed and, nope, the wind's not right, I guess I won't sow today. The wind will never be perfect, so to speak. Go out and do what you can do. There's the time for wisdom, but there's the time to stop overthinking and to work. And as the wise man here tells us, if you sit around always prognosticating on the clouds and all of the factors of my life, sometimes you have to just go and do. And as he tells us then and reassures us then, verses 5 and 6 for me are God's way of setting out a safety net to assure me that if I will have the commitment to have the work ethic I need, I will have the kind of life that he needs me to have. In verse 5, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Does God want me to have this career or that career? Do this major or that major? Accept this job offer or this job offer? Should I live here or should I live there? Should I give the effort and sacrifice to pursue this personal relationship or this one? Or neglect or refuse both? Or what should I do? Where should I live? All these things are questions that we have swirling around us. And there comes a point where if we're just waiting for every single decision and every task just to come knocking up on our front door and say, here, this is what you need to do, then we're not going to accomplish what God knows we can accomplish and the opportunities that we could take advantage of. So what the wise man here is saying is, you don't know all of the behind the scenes. You don't understand the providence of God, where it's working, how it's working. So what is the answer then? Live and work with intensity. Be wise, do your best, but don't sit around worrying about every outcome. Get out there and do your best. And the wise man here then is giving this suggestion for every aspect of our lives, all of our work, great or small. This is the cultivation of a godly work ethic that can honor him in everything. So let's just end with this comment and a couple of scriptures then from the New Testament. Plainly stated, a Christian is a diligent and hard worker. Let's go over to Ephesians chapter 6. In Ephesians chapter 6, the instruction of the apostle turns to all workers. Here he refers to the slaves, but this would apply for all of God's children who would engage in any labor. Chapter 6 and verse 5. Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, and sincerity of heart as to Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Some at the workplace will say, our boss, our company, doesn't treat us right. I don't get paid what I should. I don't have the benefits I should. They don't create a work atmosphere that they should and that they're responsible for. Why would I owe them everything? Why would I give them 100%? They haven't given me 100%. That's what the world does. The Christian does not have that attitude. The Christian says, I don't care how my boss treats me. I don't care what the work environment is like. As long as I'm here and I've got this job, every day I will give it my best. Because of my employer? Because of my supervisor? Because they deserve it? No. Many of them don't deserve it. But because God deserves that. The world, whenever there's an opportunity, do the least amount of effort to get by. If my boss or my supervisor or my company has set this bar, the world thinks, what is the least amount of effort so that I can match what is expected of me? And human nature is that I'm comfortable with that. That is ill-befitting of a child of God. The child of God does not take that into account. The child of God does the best with all the circumstances that are around them. Turn over also to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22. Bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. Beware, Christian, before you're on the job, you're in the office, you're in the factory, you're wherever the situation or the place of work is, before I goof off and waste time on social media, on ESPN, or just twiddling my thumbs, but the boss is looking, look busy. Before I have that mentality, I will understand how I work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or whatever it is, should be a reflection of my fear of God. Verse 23, and whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. Thou shalt not steal. That also applies to your workplace. Don't steal from your employer. Don't sit there using utilities when you're not working hard. Don't accept a paycheck when you have not earned it. And don't steal time from your employer by doing all these other things. This is not befitting of a child of God. It should be said of a Christian, the best worker, the hardest worker, the most diligent one is a child of God. These things don't take talent. They don't take anything but effort and want to. I want to close by looking over in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and you could probably quote this scripture with me. We'll turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and this is our end call and challenge of this lesson. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, the wise man has been reflecting upon the brevity, the fleeting nature of life. And as he says in chapter 9 and verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. Someday, each of us is going to die, unless the Lord returns first. And we will be remembered. Do you want the legacy of your life to be, he wasn't really a good worker, didn't really impress anyone at work or at home, and just was kind of a lazy person? Is that what you want to be remembered by? Some people never do anything to the potential of their ability. And when you observe this kind of person, and we all have the friends or the family members where they have so much ability, they have opportunities, they have talent, they're intelligent, they have physical gifts, they have health, they have all these things, and yet they never do anything with it, and they just waste their lives. All of us can look at that and we say, what a tragedy that is. What a waste. But each of us, in our own capacities, can do the most of what we can do. And especially in our opportunities to share the gospel with others, to be a spiritual impact on our family members and on those at work, especially in that regard. Even if I never get promotions or get any kind of, raise or anything like that at work, if I can be a hard worker in the Lord's kingdom, that's what I want to focus on. And when I get to the end of my days, I can rest easy and not have regret on what I've wasted. You don't want to get to even midlife, and especially not older age, and look back and say, why did I waste so many of those years and those opportunities just loafing around? Take life seriously. Take life intensely. And with a work ethic that's appropriate for a child of God, everywhere you are, give your best with fear of the Lord. He has given you everything, and He has deserved that from us. And so we invite you then, and we call upon you as we bring the service toward a close, that if there's in any way we can assist you in making your life right with the Lord, whether you have sins you want to confess and seek our help with, if you have any desire to become a Christian, let us know. And we will encourage you while we stand and while we sing the song.